4 miles above Germany, a bomber exploded. Alan Margee was thrown into the sky. No parachute, no hope, just the scream of freezing wind and the certainty of death. But he didn't die. Instead, he fell through the roof of a train station, crashed through glass and steel, and somehow survived. And that wasn't even the most unbelievable part of his story, because minutes before that fall, as his B-17 disintegrated around him, Margee did something no one thought possible. He kept fighting. This is the story of Alan Margee, the man who refused to surrender, even as he fell through the sky. Into the Crucible. January 3rd, 1943. The sky above Saint-Nazaire, France, was about to become hell. For the men of the United States 8th Air Force, this was just another mission in the grinding campaign to shatter Nazi Germany's war machine. The target, the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, concrete fortresses where German U-boats slipped into the Atlantic to hunt Allied convoys. The plan was simple. Fly deep into occupied France, drop your bombs, get out alive. But over Europe, nothing was ever simple. Alan Margee was a ball turret gunner on a B-17 Flying Fortress, a bomber cruise nicknamed the Flying Fort for its defensive firepower and supposed invincibility. In reality, it was a thin-skinned aluminum tube filled with fuel, explosives, and terrified young men. Margee's position was the ball turret, a plexiglass sphere mounted under the belly of the bomber, armed with twin .50 caliber machine guns. It was cramped, freezing, and utterly exposed. If the bomber went down, the ball turret gunner often had no way out. But that morning, Margee climbed in anyway. He was 22 years old. As the formation crossed the French coast, the sky began to fill with black clouds, flak bursts from German anti-aircraft guns. Each explosion sent jagged shrapnel tearing through the air, shredding metal and flesh with indifferent precision. Then came the fighters. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, dove from the sun, their cannons flashing. For bomber crews, this was the nightmare. Trapped in a slow-moving target, unable to maneuver, dependent entirely on their gunners to keep the wolves at bay. Margee pressed his face to the gun sight, tracking the German fighters as they streaked past, his .50 calibers hammered, sending bright tracers arcing through the sky. Around him, the rest of the crew fought desperately, each man locked in his own private battle. But the Germans were relentless. One FW-190 closed in, its pilot lining up a perfect shot. Cannon shells ripped through the bomber's fuselage, tearing apart engines, fuel lines, and control cables. The B-17 shuddered violently, and then, in an instant, everything went wrong. A direct hit struck the bomber's midsection. Fire erupted, metal screamed, the aircraft began to break apart. For the crew, there was no time to think, only react. Bail out or die. But for Alan Margee, trapped in the ball turret, escape was not so simple. The fall. The B-17 was dying. Flames consumed the fuselage. The wings buckled. The bomber spun out of control, tumbling through the sky like a broken toy. Inside the ball turret, Alan Margee fought to survive. He cranked the manual controls, trying to rotate the turret so he could reach the hatch and crawl back into the fuselage. But the aircraft was disintegrating, the frame warping under the force of the spin. The turret jammed. He was trapped. Around him, through the plexiglass, he could see the earth rotating. Sky, ground, over and over, faster and faster. Other crew members bailed out, their parachutes blossoming white against the chaos. But Margee couldn't reach his chute. It was inside the bomber, just feet away, but it might as well have been on another planet. Then came the explosion. The bomber's fuel tanks ignited. The blast ripped the aircraft into pieces, flinging wreckage and bodies across the sky. Alan Margee was thrown clear. No parachute, no harness, nothing but the thin flight suit on his back and the freezing air screaming past at terminal velocity. He was falling from 22,000 feet, over 4 miles above the Earth. At that altitude, the air is so thin it barely fills your lungs. The cold is so brutal it freezes exposed skin in seconds. And the fall is long enough to know exactly what's coming. Physics is merciless at these speeds. A human body reaches terminal velocity around 120 miles per hour. From 4 miles up, the fall takes roughly 3 minutes. 3 minutes to think. 3 minutes to feel the wind tearing at you. 3 minutes to watch the ground rush closer. Most people would panic. Most would lose consciousness. But Margee stayed awake. He later described the sensation as almost surreal, like watching it happen to someone else. The roar of the wind, the spinning horizon, the knowledge that in moments it would all be over. And yet, he didn't give up. Even as he fell, even knowing death was inevitable, Alan Margee did something extraordinary. He pulled his arms in tight, angled his body, and tried to control his descent. It shouldn't have mattered. Nothing should have mattered. The physics were absolute. A fall from that height is unsurvivable. But war has a way of shattering certainty, and 4 miles below, the town of Saint-Nazaire was waiting. The impossible impact. The train station's glass roof never stood a chance. Alan Margee hit it at over 100 miles per hour. The panes shattered. Steel beams buckled. He smashed through, tumbling through layers of glass and metal, each impact slowing him just slightly, just enough. Then he struck the station floor. The world went black. When German soldiers found him minutes later, they didn't believe what they were seeing. A man, battered, broken, bleeding, lying in the wreckage of the station roof. No parachute, no explanation. One soldier later recalled thinking it was a corpse. Until Margee moved, incredibly, impossibly, he was alive. His injuries were catastrophic. His right arm was nearly severed. His nose was smashed flat. His right leg and both ankles were shattered. 28 shrapnel wounds from the fighter attack peppered his body. Several ribs were broken. His right lung was punctured. By every measure, he should have been dead a dozen times over. But he wasn't. The Germans rushed him to a nearby hospital. A Luftwaffe doctor, perhaps out of professional curiosity, perhaps out of simple human decency, operated on him immediately. The doctor later told Margee that he had no medical explanation for the survival. The fall alone should have been fatal. The injuries compounded that impossibility. And yet, Margee's heart kept beating. Scientists and medical experts who studied the case later offered theories. The glass roof acted as a series of decelerators, breaking his fall in stages rather than all at once. His body may have been angled perfectly to distribute the impact. Sheer chance placed him in the one spot where survival, however improbable, was physically possible. But to those who witnessed it, there was no theory that made sense. It was simply a miracle. Word of the incident spread quickly. Even among hardened German soldiers, Margee's survival became the stuff of legend. Some called it impossible. Others whispered about divine intervention. For Alan Margee, unconscious in a hospital bed, the fight was far from over. Surviving the fall was only the beginning. Now came the war. Captivity. When Alan Margee regained consciousness, he was a prisoner. The Germans moved him to a POW camp, Stalag Luft III, the same camp that would later be immortalized in the film The Great Escape. For the next 2 years, Margee would live behind barbed wire, his body slowly healing from injuries that should have killed him. Life in a German POW camp was a test of endurance. Rations were meager: thin soup, black bread, the occasional scrap of meat. Men lost weight rapidly. Disease was rampant, and the cold was relentless. For a man with shattered bones and a punctured lung, every day was a battle. But Margee endured. His fellow prisoners treated him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Stories of his fall had reached the camp long before he did. Some men didn't believe it at first. Others simply stared as if looking at a ghost. One prisoner later recalled asking Margee what it felt like to fall from 4 miles up. Margee's answer was quiet, almost matter of fact. I thought about my family, and I thought about how much it was going to hurt. There was no bravado, no heroic speeches, just a man who had stared into the abyss and somehow lived to tell about it. The war dragged on. Seasons passed. Margee's body healed, though the scars, physical and mental, would never fully fade. He walked with a limp. His right arm never regained full strength. But he was alive. And in the spring of 1945, as Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, the camps began to empty. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe ended. Alan Margee was free. The return. Coming home was not the triumph Alan Margee had imagined. The body heals. The mind. That takes longer. Margee returned to the United States to a hero's welcome, but the cheers and parades felt distant, unreal. He had survived the impossible, but survival came with a cost. He rarely spoke about the fall. When asked, he deflected, changed the subject, or offered only the barest details. The trauma was too deep, too raw. For years he struggled. Nightmares plagued him. The sound of aircraft engines made him flinch. He relived the fall, over and over, in the quiet moments when his mind had nowhere else to go. This was not uncommon. Thousands of airmen returned from the war, carrying invisible wounds, what we now call PTSD, but what was then dismissed as battle fatigue, or simply weakness. Margee worked. He married. He tried to build a life. But the shadow of that day in 1943 never fully left him. And yet, in time, something shifted. Perhaps it was age. Perhaps it was perspective. But, as the decades passed, Margee began to speak more openly about his experience. He attended veteran reunions. He gave interviews. And slowly, he made peace with what had happened. In one interview late in his life, Margee was asked if he considered himself lucky. He paused for a long moment before answering. "I don't know if lucky is the right word," he said. "I survived. A lot of good men didn't. I think about them more than I think about the fall." Alan Margee passed away in 2003 at the age of 84. His obituary mentioned the fall, of course. It was impossible not to. But those who knew him remembered something else. His quiet strength, his humility, and his refusal to let one impossible moment define an entire life. The science of survival. Alan Margee's fall remains one of the most extraordinary survival stories in aviation history. But it is not unique. Over the decades, a handful of others have survived falls from similar heights. Flight attendant Vesna Vulovic fell 33,000 feet when her aircraft exploded over Serbia in 1972. Nicholas Alkmaid, a British tail gunner, fell 18,000 feet in 1944 and landed in a snowbank. Each case defied the odds. Each sparked the same question. How? The answer lies in physics and luck. A fall from 4 miles up is not instantly fatal because of the height. It's fatal because of the impact. The human body can survive extreme speeds. It's the sudden stop that kills. This is why Margie's survival was possible. The glass roof didn't stop his fall, it slowed it. Each pane he shattered absorbed a fraction of his kinetic energy. By the time he struck the floor, his speed had been reduced just enough to keep the impact from being instantly lethal. Think of it like crumple zones in a car. Modern vehicles are designed to absorb impact energy, protecting the passengers inside. Margie's crumple zone was an accidental arrangement of glass and steel. But even with the roof, survival required perfect conditions. His body had to strike at the right angle. His bones had to fracture in ways that didn't cause immediate internal bleeding. His organs had to remain intact enough to sustain life. The odds of all these factors aligning? Astronomically low. And yet, they did. Medical professionals who studied Margie's case noted that his youth and physical fitness likely played a role. At 22, his body was resilient, capable of withstanding trauma that might have killed an older man. But even accounting for all these factors, the consensus remains: Alan Margie should not have survived. The fact that he did is a reminder of something we often forget in the age of precision and data. Sometimes, the universe surprises us. Legacy in the sky. Alan Margie's story became a legend among airmen. In the decades following the war, bomber crews and fighter pilots alike heard the tale, often told in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. It was a story that served many purposes. For some, it was proof of divine protection. For others, it was a reminder of the sheer randomness of survival in war. And for a few, it was simply inspiration. If Margie could survive the impossible, maybe they could too. But beyond the legend, Margie's experience highlighted a brutal truth about the air war over Europe. For bomber crews, survival was never guaranteed. The odds were stacked against them from the moment they climbed into the aircraft. Flak, fighters, mechanical failures, weather, any one of these could kill you. And even if you survived the mission, there was always the next one. The 8th Air Force suffered staggering casualties. Of the roughly 350,000 men who served, over 26,000 were killed in action. Thousands more were wounded or captured. The life expectancy of a bomber crew in 1943 was measured in missions, not years. Alan Margie flew into that crucible. He faced the same dangers as thousands of others. And when his aircraft disintegrated around him, he didn't panic. He didn't freeze. He fought. And then, when fighting was no longer possible, he fell. And somehow, impossibly, he lived. His story is not just about survival. It's about the thin line between life and death, and the countless men who crossed that line and never came back. For every Alan Margie, there were 100 others who fell and didn't land in a train station, who bailed out and were shot by fighters, who burned in their aircraft or drowned in the ocean or simply vanished. Margie's survival doesn't diminish their sacrifice. If anything, it honors it, because his story reminds us of how fragile life was in those skies and how much courage it took to climb into a bomber knowing the odds. Reflection: the man who fell and fought. The story of Alan Margee is not simply about a fall. It is about resilience, about the human body's astonishing capacity to endure, about the randomness of survival in war. But most of all, it is about refusal. Refusal to surrender, even when the bomber was breaking apart. Refusal to give up, even while falling through the sky. Refusal to let one impossible moment define an entire life. Margee didn't seek glory. He didn't ask to become a legend. He simply did his job, survived the unimaginable, and then spent the rest of his life trying to make sense of it. And in that quiet struggle, he became something more than a hero. He became a reminder that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep fighting, even when the outcome seems certain. A reminder that survival is not always deserved or fair or logical. Sometimes it simply is. And a reminder that in the chaos of war, amid the fire and the falling and the fear, the human spirit remains unbreakable. Alan Margee fell 4 miles, but he never stopped fighting. And that, perhaps, is the most extraordinary part of his story. If you want to keep exploring these untold stories of courage and survival, make sure you subscribe. And let us know in the comments, which airman story should we cover next? Because every mission carried a story, and every story deserves to be remembered.